What if you could walk into any room and reliably tell who is holding power, who is bluffing, and who is ready to collaborate? This audio summary will teach you practical, testable rules for reading faces, voices, and small behaviors, so you stop guessing and start deciding with confidence. No tricks, no cold readings, only repeatable observation methods, short conversational tests, and ethical responses you can use today. Listen closely. Every minute hands you one skill that turns vague impressions into clear, useful insight. And by the end, you will be able to move through negotiations, meetings, and social moments with far less doubt and far more control. Chapter 1. The Baseline Habit. Watch first, decide later. The first discipline of reading people well is to refuse the temptation to convert an observation into a story in an instant. Begin any interaction by establishing a baseline. Spend the first 3 to 5 minutes simply noticing the other person's ordinary range of behavior when they are not pressured. Record silently the tempo of their speech, their default posture, the way their face arranges when they think, and the gestures they reach for when relaxed. This baseline gives you the expectation against which deviations become meaningful. If someone normally leans forward and suddenly withdraws, that withdrawal is a signal. If they normally speak quickly and one sentence slows down, that pause matters. Resist immediate "why" claims. When you notice a change, tag it mentally with neutral facts rather than explanations. Voice lowered at 11:03, shoulders tightened after the budget slide, smiles shortened during timeline discussion. After the interaction, convert those tags into a short evidence note, 3 facts that stood out, and 1 low-cost, curiosity-based follow-up you can use next time. The follow-up should be a soft probe that tests your leading hypothesis without accusing or dramatizing. I noticed the timing topic tightened the conversation. Is there a timing constraint we should be aware of? That phrasing invites correction and converts your intuition into testable data. Over weeks, practice stacking baselines across contexts, one-on-one conversations, small group meetings, and email exchanges, so you learn what is typical for a person rather than what is typical for you. The payoff is both accuracy and trust. People respond better to careful readers who ask precise questions than to confident narrators who leap to conclusions. The baseline habit turns impression into reliable signal and makes your interventions useful rather than intrusive. Chapter 2. Micro-expressions as prompts, not verdict. Micro-expressions are powerful precisely because they are fleeting. They reveal a raw, immediate emotional registration before composure returns. But they are not definitive verdicts about motive or long-term intent. See a micro-expression as an alert that something is happening at a level beneath conscious narrative, and use it to trigger a short diagnostic sequence rather than to declare a diagnosis. The practical sequence is simple. Note the flash, wait 2 to 5 seconds to see recovery, check for cross-channel corroboration in voice and posture, and then ask a low-threat question tailored to the context. If a client's smile tightens for a fraction of a second, when you mention price, wait to see whether the voice pitch changes or the breathing becomes shallow. If the pattern repeats when you offer payment options, the micro-expression has convergent value. Your probe should be narrow and offer dignity. I want to make sure I understand. What part of the pricing plan concerns you most? Avoid confronting about the expression itself. People rarely appreciate being told their face betrayed them. Instead, convert the signal into an evidence-seeking move that preserves trust. Practice calibrating micro-expression reads by reviewing short interactions and noting which micro-flashes predicted meaningful shifts in behavior later. The discipline is to treat micro-expressions as the starting whistle for curiosity, not the finish line for judgment. Chapter 3. Voice and Rhythm, Listening to the Between Word. Signal's voice carries continuous metadata, pitch range, cadence, pause patterns and volume dynamics that often outruns the literal content of sentences. To use voice as a diagnostic channel, listen first for baseline pitch and cadence, then detect mismatches between content and tone. A calm message delivered in clipped, rapid cadence may conceal tension. A slow, steady rhythm accompanying vague language may indicate evasive deliberation rather than contemplative clarity. Train your ear to notice 3 practical features in any conversation: where the speaker places emphatic stress, where they inhale before the key sentence, and where pauses lengthen before topics. Emphatic stress tells you priorities. Pre-claim inhalations show cognitive load. Extended pauses often hide unprocessed feelings or strategic withholding. Use gentle mirroring to test vocal inferences, match slightly slower cadence or reduced volume, and pose a small, clarifying question. If the speaker relaxes and matches your rhythm, you likely found a connective form. If they tighten, the original pattern probably served protective function. Additionally, track modal words, perhaps, maybe, I think, because increased hedging usually signals uncertain commitment, while absolute language often masks rhetorical stance rather than factual certainty. The voice is not a truth machine, but when combined with baseline and micro-expression observation, it becomes a richly actionable source that helps you choose timing, tone, and the exact probe that will produce real information rather than performative deflection. Chapter 4. Language Omissions and the Power of the Unsaid. The things people avoid saying often reveal more than what they state explicitly. Practice an omission audit by paying attention to names, numbers, and specific nouns that speakers skirt. When someone talks around a particular word, compensation, timeline, responsibility, note the avoidance and use a neutral, normalizing question to name it. Can you help me understand your thinking on the timeline? Naming normalizes the topic and often collapses avoidant energy. Watch for nominalization turning processes into static nouns because it frequently serves to blunt accountability. Saying there's a problem instead of we missed our milestone converts a solvable event into an abstract obstacle. Also observe pronoun shifts. Slipping from I to we when describing a failure often diffuses ownership and signals discomfort. Silence itself is a deliberate resource. Learn to use pause strategically after a direct question and allow the silence to stretch. People will often fill it with more honest content once the social pressure to perform recedes. The practical habit is to convert omissions into focused, low-threat probes that invite specificity while preserving dignity. Over time, you will move conversations from fuzzy declamations to concrete items you can act on simply by honoring what is unsaid and naming it with curiosity rather than accusation. Chapter 5. Contextual Triangulation, Cross-check. Across channels and time. A single cue in isolation is fragile. Reliable reading requires triangulation across channels, face, voice, language, and across moments. After you notice an unusual behavior, don't act immediately. Instead, gather data from at least 2 additional points, How did the person act before and after the event? What did their voice do and what did they emit? For example, a terse email followed by a warm in-person greeting suggests performative brevity rather than hostility. Observe behavior across contexts, client calls, informal chats, written notes, and construct a simple matrix. Typical versus deviant signals, context triggers, and recovery patterns. Use low-cost probes as tests, a short clarifying question, a small offer, or a scheduling change will show whether a deviation was situational or trait-like. Record a one-sentence hypothesis and one testable follow-up in your notes. Over time, this triangulation builds a probabilistic profile that reduces false positives and improves your timing for raising sensitive subjects. Practically, you'll find that patterns, consistency across channels and repeat occurrences across time predict outcomes far better than any single dramatic flash. Triangulation is the disciplined middle path between paranoid inference and lazy assumption. Chapter 6. Strategic. Questioning. Ask to learn, not to trap. Once you have observed and triangulated, your questions determine whether you gain clarity or provoke retreat. Design questions as minimal threat instruments that convert assumptions into testable evidence. Use starters that lower guardrails, help me understand, I'm curious about, and then narrow quickly to concrete choices. Which of these two timelines would help you most, A for speed or B for stability? Forced choice questions often produce clearer answers than open invitations, especially under pressure. When probing emotions, use reflective starters that validate before asking for detail. That sounded important. What part feels most urgent for you? Sequence matters. Facts first, perceptions second, feelings last. Keep questions short and pause to let the answer surface rather than fill silence with follow-up that leads the witness. When sensitive issues arise, offer opt-out language. If you'd rather not discuss this now, we can schedule time, so your curiosity does not feel like interrogation. Finally, test hypotheses with conditional offers that reveal priorities without cornering the other party. If we prioritized X, would that address your main concern? Strategic questioning is less about clever phrasing and more about respecting autonomy while converting vague signals into useful, actionable information. Chapter 7. Small behavioral tests convert hunches into data. The most reliable way to confirm a reading is through inexpensive behavioral tests that produce rapid feedback. Design micro-experiments, ask for a small commitment, propose a short pilot, or offer 2 realistic options and watch choice and effect. Tests should be reversible and low cost so you avoid burning bridges. For instance, if you suspect a colleague prioritizes certainty over speed, propose a 1-week prototype with clear check-ins and see whether they prefer certainty or rapid iteration. Observe not only the verbal choice but the micro-behaviors. Did they exhale in relief? Did their voice brighten? Or did they hedge even after agreeing? Log results in a simple 2-line format: hypothesis, result. The scientific stance, provisional models updated by data, frees you from the tyranny of certainty and trains your partners to think experimentally as well. Over time, small tests create a pattern of evidence that outperforms intuition and leads to decisions that align with real preferences rather than imagined motives. Chapter 8. Detecting stress and capacity before breakdown. Stress shows up first in procedural slips, missed small details, delayed replies, shorter sentences, and later ineffective signs like irritability and flattened affect. The practical reader tracks micro-degradation, abrupt cancellations, increased hedging, and a rise in error rates. Treat these as capacity signals, not moral failings, and respond with immediate compression tactics, reduce scope, provide a clear priority list, or offer specific help. A simple capacity check question works. How is your load this week, and would shifting one deadline help? In teams, use lightweight tools like a visible workload board or one-line daily status to reveal early strain. Individually, notice physiological signs, skipped beats in voice, faster breathing, hollowed eyes, and triangulate with behavior before intervening. Early practical support preserves performance and trust. The reader who detects capacity limits before crises earns credibility because they act to protect people rather than to penalize them. Chapter 9. Cultural and Contextual Translation. Beware universalizing. Cues. Signals are culturally and contextually coded. The same facial expression or proxemic choice can mean very different things across cultures, organizations, and personal histories. Approach people reading with humility. When you encounter a pattern that clashes with your expectations, slow down and ask context questions rather than impose your own framework. Learn a few local translation rules. For example, norms about eye contact, directness, or acceptable interruption, and adjust your baseline accordingly. When operating across cultures, prioritize explicit clarifying probes and avoid moral labels. Use modest language. Help me understand how you typically handle feedback in your context, and listen for norms rather than judging behavior. This contextual humility reduces false positives and increases the chance that your interventions will be both effective and respectful. Chapter 10. Ethics and the Responsibility of Knowing. Reading people confers influence, and with influence comes ethical responsibility. Use insights to reduce friction, create mutual value, and protect dignity rather than to manipulate or exploit. When a read suggests vulnerability, shift towards support. Offer optional help, increase transparency, or design safer choices rather than leveraging weakness. Practice transparent curiosity. If your reading is significant to a decision, disclose your line of thinking at a high level and invite correction. I noticed X and I may be wrong. How do you see it? Which both improves accuracy and preserves agency. Institutionalize safeguards. Do not store sensitive behavioral profiles without consent. Limit sharing to those who need to act on the information, and build simple policies that prioritize consent and repair when errors occur. The craft of reading people reaches its highest value when it fosters trust and collaboration. Skill without ethics becomes a transactional lever, while skill with responsibility strengthens relationships and produces better outcomes for everyone involved. Chapter 11. Reading long-term. Patterns and reputation signals. The most predictive signals about a person rarely appear in a single meeting. They live in patterns that develop across months and in the way others speak about the person when they are not present. To read long-term patterns, begin by collecting low-cost repeated observations and turning them into a simple ledger. Reliability, responsiveness, quality of follow-up, and recovery after setbacks. Reliability is visible in the smallest acts repeated over time. Someone who consistently arrives 5 minutes early, replies within a day to time-sensitive requests, and shows up to agreed checkpoints demonstrates an operational commitment that a single eloquent promise cannot match. Responsiveness is not only speed, but the quality of replies. A fast but vague reply is different from a fast and clarifying reply. Quality of follow-up measures whether feedback leads to measurable corrections or whether the same mistakes recur. Recovery after setbacks is one of the most telling pattern signals. Watch how someone behaves when they fail. Do they offer concrete remedies and new timelines, or do they offer apologies without corrective action? The former is a program of repair, the latter is theatre. To operationalize pattern reading, keep a 3-column micro-journal in a private note for recurring people. What promise? What delivery? What remedy when things slipped? Update it after each relevant interaction. Over weeks, this ledger turns intuition into prediction because patterns amplify meaning. Complement the ledger with reputation sampling. When appropriate and ethical, ask 2 or 3 independent colleagues a narrow-framed question about performance and style rather than soliciting free-form gossip. Ask, in your recent experience, does X follow through on small commitments? The narrow ask reduces biased storytelling and yields comparable data points. Another robust source is the person's network behavior. Who do they introduce? How do they protect or elevate others? Do they reciprocate favors or only extract value? People who build durable networks usually reciprocate quietly and are visible in third-party references. Finally, resist the allure of the spectacular story. High-drama events attract attention but often misrepresent typical behavior. The person who delivered under extraordinary pressure once is different from the person who delivers steadily under routine pressure. Pattern reading privileges frequency and corrective behavior over single heroic anecdotes. Use these long-term signals to inform hiring decisions, partnership commitments, and promotions because they forecast future behavior more reliably than charisma, confident storytelling, or isolated achievements. The practical payoff is tangible. When you base choices on repeated, recorded patterns rather than a single meeting, your selection error declines and the people you rely on will more often do what you expect. Chapter 12. The Dynamics of Trust, Repair and Calibration. Trust breaks and trust repair follow predictable micro-rituals that anyone can learn and apply. The first step is accuracy in diagnosis. Not every breach is equal, and repair requires matching remedy to the type of breach. When trust is violated by incompetence, the repair path emphasizes competence building and compensation. A missed deadline rooted in poor planning is repaired by concrete remediation steps, revised processes, and demonstrable change in future outcomes. When trust is violated by dishonesty, the initial requirement is transparency and accountability. A bare apology without a factual account and clear corrective steps will not restore trust. In practice, the repair sequence has 3 elements: acknowledgement, specific remediation, and observable verification. Acknowledgement means naming the harm succinctly and without hedging. For example, I missed the deadline and that failure caused X problem. Do not dilute the statement with excuses. Specific remediation is a concrete plan with dates. Here is how I will fix it, and when you will see the first evidence. Observable verification converts words into measurable milestones and reduces ambiguity. Offer small, rapid wins early in the repair timeline so the other party experiences progress rather than waiting on promises. A useful tactical rule is the restoration test. After proposing remediation, invite a short experiment that allows the injured party to verify behavior in a contained way. For instance, provide a prioritized status update twice a week for a month, rather than asking for trust immediately. Repair also requires managing expectations. Clarify what will change and what will not. Overpromising undermines repair. Another common dynamic is the social ripple. Trust breaches rarely affect only two people. Repair work should include communication with affected stakeholders, not defensively, but to restore clarity about next steps and to rebuild shared norms. Finally, learn to calibrate forgiveness pragmatically. Some relationships can be rebuilt to prior function, others are better redefined with new boundaries. Use the ledger method from long-term pattern reading to track post-repair behavior. If corrective patterns appear reliably, then expand responsibility slowly. If patterns revert to old behavior, close the loop and protect your team. Trust repair is less about heroics and more about disciplined accountability combined with small, verifiable evidence that the failure will not recur. Chapter 13. Reading Group Dynamics and Coalition Signals. People rarely act alone, and the most actionable signals emerge from how groups organize themselves, rather than from any single actor. Start group reading by mapping formal roles and then filming the informal choreography. Who speaks first? Who interrupts? Who consistently seeks eye contact with whom? And who is repeatedly deferred to when decisions are ambiguous. Coalitions reveal themselves in patterns of alignment. Two people who trade glances before commenting are likely coordinating. One person who consistently frames proposals and another who quiets corrects is a longitudinal alliance of agenda and enforcement. To read these dynamics, use a short observational template during meetings. Note the opening alignments, the pivot points where opinions solidify, and the exit patterns when consensus emerges. Look for the three types of influencers. First, visible influencers who speak frequently and command explicit attention. Second, quiet influencers who speak rarely but whose opinions shift outcomes when they do. Third, network influencers whose power is exercised through private channels and who can mobilize resources behind the scenes. Each type requires a different approach. Visible influencers respond to public framing, quiet influencers to well-crafted facts, and network influencers to private briefings that respect their role in the ecosystem. Another critical pattern is the threshold of dissent. Does dissent get aired publicly or suppressed until after the meeting? In systems where dissent is suppressed, decisions can carry hidden fragility and fail in implementation. Encourage a rotation of speaking slots and brief pre-meeting runs to reveal hidden objections early. Use small probes, present two small options, and watch coalition shifts to test the durability of alliances. Also notice how the group treats newcomers. Inclusion patterns predict whether the group will adapt to new information or entrench existing plans. Finally, be ethical. Mapping coalition dynamics confers power and should be used to foster healthier debate and better decisions, not manipulation. Use your group reads to design meeting structures that surface disagreements safely and convert factional energy into constructive trade-offs. Chapter 14. Predicting behavior from small habits and micro-routines. Habits encode preference and capacity more reliably than stated goals. To predict future behavior, train yourself to notice micro-routines, morning message checks, the cadence of draft revisions, patterns in calendar commitments, and small rituals such as always copying a particular person on correspondence. These micro-routines reveal priorities and constraints. For instance, someone who habitually schedules focused, deep work blocks and consistently defends them is likely to deliver thoughtful, higher quality outputs. Someone whose calendar is full of reactive meetings, but who occasionally blocks an hour for writing, may struggle to sustain deep work without support. Track micro-routines across 3 domains: time management, communication style, and error handling. Time management routines show how attention is allocated. Communication routines show how they manage social friction. Error handling routines reveal whether they treat problems as learning moments or threats to status. To convert observations into prediction, design small bets around routine behavior. If a colleague always responds to client emails within 4 hours, you can predict responsiveness and use it to structure joint deadlines. If someone always drafts in private and shares late for feedback, schedule review deadlines that account for that habit. When trying to change behavior, target the routine rather than willpower. Introduce environmental cues and tiny friction changes. If late submissions are a problem, require a brief interim check-in as a calendar event rather than a verbal reminder. Habits are sticky because they reduce decision friction. Re-engineering small cue and reward loops is far more effective than exhortation. Finally, document micro-routine patterns in lightweight profiles and revisit them quarterly. People evolve, but slowly. The aggregate of small habits furnishes a predictable surface from which to design interactions, allocate tasks, and manage collaboration with precision. Chapter 15. Integrating People. Reading into decision systems. Reading people becomes scalable and low risk when embedded into decision protocols rather than kept as implicit intuition. Start by formalizing one simple practice, a pre-decision checklist that includes a people read line. Before any hire, partnership, or promotion, require a 2-minute synthesis that answers 3 questions. What patterns of behavior support this decision? What small tests validate those patterns? And what mitigation steps exist if the pattern fails? Make the synthesis a mandatory artifact attached to the approval process. Second, create micro-experiments as standard operating procedures. Treat early phases of collaboration as pilots with clear metrics and short timelines rather than all-or-nothing commitments. This institutionalizes the experimental stance you use in one-on-one reading and protects the organization from single-point failures. Third, rotate decision perspectives. Invite a trusted skeptic to review people-based assumptions and a close ally to highlight strengths, then synthesize. This reduces confirmation bias and improves calibration. Fourth, log outcomes. Maintain a compact decision, outcomes register, that records initial people-based reads, the tests run, and actual results at 3 and 6 months. Use this register to refine heuristics and to build organizational memory about which signals were predictive in your specific context. Finally, embed ethical guardrails. Ensure people profiles are used only by those who need them. Anonymize sensitive notes when possible, and provide mechanisms for correction if a read was mistaken. When people reading is operationalized in these simple ways, it moves from precarious intuition to a measured input that improves decisions, speeds learning, and preserves dignity. The goal is not to eliminate judgment, but to convert it into accountable, testable, and improvable practice. Chapter 16. Reading Deception versus Stress. How to tell the difference. Detecting deception is a popular promise, but the more useful and realistic skill is discriminating between deliberate concealment and stress-driven distortion. People lie, but more often they simply cope with pressure, confusion, or conflicting incentives, and those states produce many of the same surface signals as deception: shorter answers, micro-expressions, vocal strain, and avoidance of specifics. The practical distinction begins with tempo and recovery. Deception often requires cognitive load, inventing details, maintaining consistency, and monitoring the listener. That cognitive load commonly shows as slightly slower reaction time on follow-ups, more speech repairs, and a careful balancing of narrative elements. Stress, by contrast, tends to produce immediate physiological signatures: shallower breath, quicker cadence, elevated pitch, coupled with reduced cognitive bandwidth that makes answers fragmentary rather than fabricated. To test this in real time, employ a simple two-step protocol. First, ask a neutral baseline question unrelated to the sensitive topic to establish reaction time and tone. Second, return to the target topic and use a small verification probe that requires a specific, checkable detail. For example, in a procurement discussion, ask a casual operational question about regular processes, note the cadence, then ask for a precise document date or invoice number. Stress will usually manifest as evasive vagueness, while fabricated answers will often produce over-precision or rehearsed qualifiers. Cross-channel corroboration is essential. Pair vocal cues with micro-expression and language omission checks, and then observe recovery. A deceptive account often shows a carefully managed recovery where the speaker regains composure strategically. Stress-related responses more often show lingering physiological signs and inconsistent follow-up behavior. Another practical move is to introduce reversibility. Frame the question as a testable hypothesis rather than an accusation. Help me understand the timing so I can align resources. Then offer a low-cost way to confirm, like sending a single email or attaching a file. Those who were deceptive may resist or overcompensate. Those who are stressed typically comply and welcome the structure because it reduces ambiguity. Use also the archival check. Where possible, verify one specific fact after the conversation, then revisit the person with the verification neutrally. Oh, the file shows X date. Can we align on next steps? How they react to gentle factual correction is diagnostic. A deceptive stance may further entrench at rhetorical level. A stressed person will often pivot to pragmatic repair. Finally, treat any strong read as provisional until you have documented evidence. Label your notes clearly: observation, hypothesis, verification step, so you do not conflate intuition with proof. The aim is not to catch a liar theatrically, but to convert relational ambiguity into operational clarity. When you can reliably separate stress from deceit, you avoid unnecessary confrontations, protect relationships, and design appropriate interventions. Support and capacity for the stressed, accountability, and documentation where deception appears plausible. That pattern both reduces error and preserves dignity, which is the pragmatic heart of applied people reading. Chapter 17: Ethical Use of Technology and Data in People Reading. Modern tools, calendar metadata, email timing patterns, collaboration analytics, and even workplace sensing offer powerful amplifiers for human judgment, but they also increase the risk of overreach, bias, and privacy violations. The first rule is proportionality. only collect and act on data that materially improves outcomes and that cannot reasonably be obtained through direct conversation. For example, use response time trends as a signal that someone is overloaded and then verify with a short, respectful check-in rather than automatically rerouting tasks based on an algorithm. Second, secure consent and transparency where feasible. If you use aggregated engagement metrics to shape team processes, announce the methodology and the intended improvements, allow opt-out for identifiable level insights unless there is a legitimate, documented safety reason. Third, build small verification loops. Treat algorithmic flags as hypotheses to be tested through low-intrusion human probes. If a system flags a pattern of missed commitments, run a brief human audit, 1 or 2 targeted checks, before taking consequential action. This protects people from black box decisions and reduces false positives. Fourth, design for fairness by auditing signals for bias. Many digital traces correlate with demographic or role-based factors that are not causally related to performance. Correct for those correlations before relying on them for decisions like promotion or redundancy. Practical steps include sampling diverse cases, running error analyses, and setting conservative thresholds for automated interventions. Fifth, protect sensitive profiles. If you keep behavioral notes, limit access, and maintain a correction mechanism so people can contest or annotate entries. Treat the notes as working hypotheses, not immutable dossiers. Finally, use technology to reduce harm and increase autonomy. Automate routine handoffs to free cognitive bandwidth, surface workload imbalances for voluntary reallocation, and provide private dashboards where individuals can see and control their own signals rather than being subject to hidden scoring. The ethical posture reframes people reading technology from surveillance to stewardship. It should help people manage attention, reduce unfair friction, and increase consentful transparency. When organizations adopt that stance, the combined power of human judgment and digital data becomes a force multiplier for trust rather than a covert lever of control. Chapter 18. Exercises to sharpen perceptual habits, daily practices. That work, perceptual acuity is a craft you rehearse, not an innate gift, and the most efficient way to improve is through short, deliberate exercises that build specific sub-skills. Start with the baseline calibration drill. Each day, for 5 minutes, watch a short, mundane interaction, an elevator conversation, a barista exchange, a 2-person meeting, and note 3 neutral observations without interpretation: posture, speech rate, and a single omitted noun. After a week, compare notes to outcomes when possible. Next, practice micro-expression spotting with video slow-motion review. Watch short clips muted and note facial micro-flashes, then play with sound and compare your reads to the transcript. This sharpens visual linguistic triangulation. Third, run vocal rhythm exercises. Record 3 short practice questions and listen for pitch, cadence, and pause placement. Then practice mirroring those rhythms to see how others respond. This trains timing and tone adjustment. Fourth, habit recoding. For one recurring relationship, keep a 2-line ledger, typical behavior, and 1 successful micro-test. Update it weekly, and design a single micro-experiment, a forced choice ask, a small pilot, to validate your read. Fifth, stress test tolerance. Purposefully enter a brief, ambiguous social scenario, a short, low-stakes disagreement or an unfamiliar group, and practice the 3-minute timeout and factual listing technique to convert rumination into testable actions. Sixth, cultivate reflective humility with post-interaction reviews. After important conversations, write 3 facts that supported your read, 1 fact that contradicted it, and 1 clear follow-up to reduce ambiguity. The keystone of all exercises is immediate feedback. Without evidence, you cannot learn. Make small wins public in trusted circles to get external calibration and to normalize correction. Finally, rotate exercises to avoid overfitting to one style. Perceptual skill benefits from diversity of contexts. Short, consistent practice outperforms sporadic grand tests. The brain rewires through repetition. Adopt these drills as micro-routines and watch accuracy, confidence, and relational outcomes improve measurably. Chapter 19. Teaching others and scaling. People reading skills in teams. When people reading works, it should not be a secret kept by a few. Scale the craft through simple teaching rituals that institutionalize humility and verification. Begin with shared language. Create a 1-page glossary of observational terms: baseline, micro-expression, triangulation, stress versus deception, so teams use consistent descriptors rather than metaphors. Second, run short lab sessions where pairs practice a 5-minute observation and then swap notes with guided reflection. These low-stakes labs accelerate calibration and expose personal bias. Third, structure decision protocols to require explicit evidence lines. Before hires or promotions, demand a 2-line evidence synthesis showing observed behaviors and outcome-linked tests. Fourth, distribute verification responsibilities. Don't let a single reader's judgment control outcomes. Require 2 independent observations or a small pilot for consequential moves. Fifth, cultivate a feedback culture where being corrected is ordinary. Celebrate revisions of hypotheses publicly to reduce reputational cost of error. Sixth, build ethical norms into training. Teach when to pause, how to ask for consent, and how to store sensitive notes safely. Seventh, measure outcomes, not just process. Track whether decisions informed by people reading yield better onboarding, lower turnover, or faster collaboration. Finally, keep learning loops short. Revise training and affordances quarterly based on error analysis. Scaling is not about mass surveillance or replicating an expert's charisma. It is about replicating disciplined habits. Baseline, probe, test, verify, so teams become collectively more precise, less biased, and more humane in their use of interpersonal insight. Chapter 20. Integrating People. Reading into wise action, decision templates and boundaries. The final move is to embed people reading into decision templates that prioritize ethics, verification, and reversibility. For any consequential choice, require a short 3-part template. What we observed, 3 facts. What we hypothesize, 1 sentence. And what small test or mitigation we will run if the hypothesis is wrong, 1 action with a deadline. Attach a privacy and consent check. Who needs to know, who must consent, and how will sensitive notes be stored or deleted. Make the test short, reversible, and minimally intrusive. Pilots with clear metrics are optimal. Another boundary is the no exploitation rule. Insights about vulnerability cannot be used to extract advantage. They must translate into support, clearer options, or protective policies. Build escalation rules for red flags, possible deception, safety concerns, or severe capacity collapse, so responses are timely and appropriate. Operationalize feedback loops after 3 months, review the outcome, adjust profiles, and publish sanitized lessons learned for organizational learning. Encourage a posture of provisionality. Treat every people-derived decision as a hypothesis to be refined. Finally, preserve human dignity by ensuring those who are read are offered agency, inviting correction, offering context, and providing a pathway to repair reputational harm if misreads occurred. When integrated this way, people reading becomes a practical lever for better choices, faster learning, and healthier relationships rather than a tool of covert advantage. Conclusion: from perception to prudence, the responsible path forward. Reading people is a practical craft of attention, testing, and humility. The value lies not in knowing more for its own sake, but in converting that knowledge into safer decisions, clearer communication, and ethical support. Train your eyes, ears, and queries with short daily drills. Verify algorithmic alerts with human check-ins. Scale the craft with shared language and simple protocols, and always attach safeguards that preserve privacy and consent. The real power of this skill is not persuasion but prudence, the ability to move from noisy impression to measured action while protecting dignity, reducing error, and improving outcomes for everyone involved. Start small this week. Pick one relationship, run a single micro-test, record the result, and let steady practice turn curiosity into reliable judgment.